Hey, hey.
Hey,
Hey,
what's going on? I figured I'd start with a sermon today. Why not, right?
hey, when you got the platform and the podium, you
Yes.
preach. So
Yes.
it's all good. Hey,
Yeah.
you were saying something in your intro there that I want to just do a double thumbs up to, and that is, you make your programming work. It's like you're introducing something. We moved up to the farm up in North Carolina about 3 years ago,
Okay.
and it was interesting because we know we're supposed to be here, but we don't quite know what we're supposed to be doing up here. It has a beautiful
Yeah.
school for teaching movement and retreats, and we just started offering chronic pain intensive retreats, like 4 days for people to come up. And the
Wow.
first one we offered, there was one pain person, so I gave 3 spots away so
Yes.
that I had a full cohort, right?
Yes.
And we had such a good experience that the second one filled up with paying people. And, it's just like the idea of, you pay it forward, and we were able to take care of 3 people in the community that would have never been able to afford, a 4 day
Yes.
intensive, Pilates and rehabilitation retreat. And yet
Sure.
you got to enjoy it. And it's amazing that just, we talk about karma or paying it forward
Hmm.
and just make it happen. If you got extra
Yeah.
space there, scholarship somebody who would never otherwise have a
Hmm.
chance to learn from you.
Yes. Well, I've been playing with this concept for a while because like scholarships are great, but then you have to like raise money from people to do that. Giving away for free outright is fine because the people appreciate it. But I want to put it back on our community. Like for example, Brent, if you have like a course coming up and it costs $200 for some little weekend course, I'm like, if I can actually afford it, I'd love to be in a position where I can buy one and then buy a second one for you to gift. So you're still getting paid. The person
Yeah.
gets to go for free, and I feel good about the fact that I'm giving. So obviously, we're not made of money, but like if we can get in that mindset, that's a different way of approaching it.
Yeah, and I guess what you were saying, Martin, one thing is that if you already organized it and you didn't sell out, you only had one person, you're going to be there anyway. You might as well maybe give a couple more spots to have the energy so you have somebody to teach, so it makes it a little bit
Yes,
easier.
yes,
You bring up another good point is we had a group for about 10 years of patients with Parkinson's that were coming in just to do Pilates. They weren't coming as patients, and we got it down to where they only had to pay about $10, I believe, a session. So you can imagine, the amount of we had to have 4 or 5 people when we would have 8 or so of the individuals coming in just to make sure they were safe. Some of
yes,
them very advanced. But I would always schedule it around the same time that we would have a heavy patient load. And a lot of
yeah,
our patients were very privileged. So they would, have a little pity moment. And I'd say, rather than pity, just pay $250 and you
right,
cover that person's, Pilates classes for 2 months. And we
yes.
had so many people that, anteed up and pulled out of pocket and would
Pull
donate
on
to
those
them.
heartstrings, and yep,
Hey, you just got to put it in the right place at the right time and let them
yes.
see what's going on. And,
Hmm.
I agree with you
Sure.
100%.
There's something to be said for being shameless, for being compelled by your passion and letting that consume you to the point where you don't feel like, oh, I'm not going to ask and they'll say no, or I don't want to inconvenience them. Like, I love when we can get to a place where it's that important that you say, hey, ante up. If you feel bad, like, why not? Like, where we can get to that place. I feel like that's something that, us as warm, fuzzy Pilates people, sometimes we don't have that skill set. And I think that when we go from our place of movement, go from our place of passion, we can get there as we practice, as we get our reps doing it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's a
Um,
skill set. I mean,
yeah.
it's sales 101.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times I also am impressed by how often we as Pilates teachers are afraid to ask to get paid for the services we render or the right amount for the
Yes.
services we render, and
Yeah. Yes.
I always have taken pride in the point of being able to, you know, do pro bono work where pro bono work is needed and to ask for those that are using my services for the money that it's worth. So it's
Yes.
never that it's devaluating what we offer. So when you
Right.
put a price of, look, my time is worth this many dollars an hour,
Hmm.
then you can always tell somebody, normally my price is this much. I know you're in a hardship. Can you do 3 sessions at this price?
Yes.
But you always value yourself at that value point that you have
Right.
and never feel guilty about that. Never feel like, it's like all of the work that we do as Pilates teachers to be able to be who we are and to what we invest in ourselves, even the time you're taking to listen to this podcast right now.
Right.
That's an investment in your time, and hopefully we make it worth your while today. I know I've watched a number of your podcasts, Martin, and was very impressed with the content and the energy and the messages that are coming out. So glad to
thank you. Yeah, no, it's the honor is mine. We've been beating down this price, value, charge rate, confidence thing over the last 6 or 7 conversations. For some reason, it keeps coming up. And I'm just letting it ride. I'm not changing the subject. So I don't know, for those of you who are watching this, if you're like rolling your eyes because we're talking about charging what you're worth and valuing yourself, I don't care. I think that we need to come to a place of just understanding that once we have that value for ourselves and that there's a level of influence that comes with that, then we can speak to other things that are happening in our space, right? So, yeah.
A lot of people gave their services away for free in the beginning of COVID. Maybe some still do. Which was very generous. And then what they ended up doing was creating new pathways of being able to generate revenue as teachers. I saw a little bit of that in some of your previous podcasts. And I think that is, again, realizing the value. One of the things we noticed, one of our teachers was like, well, now I can teach people from all around the world in a virtual class.
Yes.
And it's like, that's right, you can. And how valuable is that? It's like if you could have, 10, 20 people on a virtual class and then have people registering to have the class that's in your library, it's like now, how valuable is your time? How valuable did your time just become in that little shift of distribution, of how you can distribute your time? And it's like when they realize, look, 20 people paying, $10 for a class is a $200 an hour generation online with no physical costs other than maybe your mind body online account. It's like all of a sudden the bell goes off. It's like, wow, I can, with my skill set, I can generate, a lot of revenue and I can also improve the quality of my life.
Right. Yes.
Makes me a better teacher. Makes me a better person.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the terms we were talking about before coming online was I was looking at your website and it just said Brent Anderson elaborates on Joseph Pilates' mind-body work. And I think that was a fun way of explaining what you do. So can you just take a second, just talk about Polestar and then just how you've landed at this place?
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I love whenever I looked at the different elders, years ago, Elizabeth Larkham and I were partners towards the end of the 80s. So 89, 90, we started working together. And we would go study with as many of the elders as we could. So we would take a week off. We'd fly to New Mexico to be with E. Gentry. We'd fly to New York to be with Romano, Corolla, or Jean-Claude West, the second generation, and Ron Fletcher. We just would go down the list and we'd try to learn from as many as we could. But our goal was to look at the commonalities between them, not the differences. Look at the commonalities.
Right. Yes.
And Polestar was built on the commonalities, not the differences. And then what we tried to do was to bring the evidence-based into it, to be able to show that, Pilates had merit. And even though some of the words that we would use would be considered an alternative or complementary therapy, our goal was to make it so that it was accepted as a evidence-based practice, which it is these days, right? We look at all of the documentation software throughout the physical therapy world. Pilates now is inside those documentation software.
Fantastic.
We have over 300 juried articles in the literature of the effect of Pilates, and from everything from obesity to young women's diet to dementia. I mean, the list goes on and on to different populations that we serve, which brings me to your question, is the idea of, we call them the essentials. Joseph Pilates, in his definition, he said, the whole body health could be achieved through a balance of exercise, nutrition, sleep habits, hygiene. And in hygiene, we also include mental hygiene because we have such a challenge with that today, right?
Love that phrase. Yeah.
And I'll come back to that one. I think that's really important. And then
Absolutely.
fresh air, fresh sunshine, and a balance between work, rest, and recreation. And so what we end up seeing, Martin, is lifestyle. And that was what contrology was for Joseph. So I think instead of getting
Mm.
so caught up in the actual repertoire, which I still believe is very important, but getting caught up in saying, well, you teach short spine this way, and I teach short spine that way, or I learned it from this elder, you learned from this elder. It's like, yeah, I got it. The key is that we have exercise that looks at balancing our whole body
Yes.
and preparing us for the imbalances of life.
Of life.
That's what Joseph was doing. And if you dig deep enough, you start realizing that even though he had his sequences, when he worked with an individual, the elder said that he would go all over the place based on what the needs was of that individual. I watched Romana do the same thing. You know, Romana would sit there and say, no, it has to be done this way. And then somebody would come in with a special need, and she would manipulate everything to be able to serve that client in the best way.
Right.
You know, and the same thing with, you know, Eve Gentry. So it was beautiful for me to see that. And I think that when we look at what we teach, we don't teach an exercise regimen. We teach a philosophy of life. We teach a,
Interesting.
you know,
Yeah.
that is built around movement. You know, most of us are going to approach it through and from movement. I certainly do. You certainly do.
Absolutely.
But movement increases awareness.
Yes.
And, you know, awareness could be as simple as, what do you feel like eating after you do a Pilates class? You know, what do you feel like, you know, what are the thoughts in your head after doing a Pilates class? Are you self-deprivating? Are you saying bad things about yourself in your head, or how bad you are, all those things? Probably not. You know, and this is the kind of thing that we find that through movement with consciousness and awareness, people start seeking naturally and energetically balance in their life.
Yes.
And that's our tool. So we're not psychologists, we're not nutritionists, you know, we're not life counselors or life coaches. But if we can broaden the idea of the impact that our movement training has on people's well-being, and we can even bring it up as to how the language that we use with them. So, for example, when a client says something like, I can't do that, you know, we could very simply say something soft like, yet.
Yes.
Yet. Right? It'll happen. Just be patient. It doesn't have to happen today. Right? Or, you know, I don't like that yet. Yeah.
I love using yet.
Just keep it simple. You know, it's not criticizing them. It's just giving them a little bit of hope.
Yes.
And we know what hope does, right? Hope spiritually and psychologically releases dopamine. I mean, it's what gives us, you know, motivation. Dopamine is the motivation neurotransmitter. So
I've said that we are brokers of hope. Like that's the way I look at it when we're in here. And where you're coming from a science background, my background is in counseling. So I always try and layer in just that human interaction and those sort of things. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. Obviously the science is fascinated with it too, but like you see that relational piece and the relationship with their own body, the relationship with food, the relationship with sleep, the relationship with stress, and bringing all those things into the room.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, we're complicated animals. You know, anybody that thinks that, you know, you can teach everybody the same way. I mean, I always find it funny when, you know, a physical therapist or a Pilates teacher or yoga teacher get frustrated with a client because the client doesn't respond to their cueing.
Yes.
And it's like, I know that we get attached to our cueing. Like we get attached where this is the best cue ever that I use, or I got the best tactile cue or the best image, and it doesn't work for somebody. And so we can either identify them as a movement moron, or we can change our imaging to find the image that works for that individual, and to accept and be humble and accept the fact that there is no perfect tactile or verbal cueing or teaching methodology that's going to be universal.
Right. Or as Mr. Miyagi says, there's no bad students, just bad teachers.
Yeah, we say when the teacher stops learning, they should stop teaching.
Yes. Yes. There's a few comments here I want to circle back to.
Sure.
I believe there it is. Ultimate Serenity Bodywork said, "Why did you choose Polestar over Balanced Body or Peak Pilates? Wondering the difference between all of them myself." So yeah, just for the audience, just explain the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I'm the founder of Polestar. So
Mhm.
Polestar was, it was a balanced body derivative. Balanced body was current concepts at the time.
Yes.
And Elizabeth Larkin was teaching at St. Francis Hospital, and I had just relocated to Sacramento, California, after finishing my physical therapy degree at UC San Francisco. And the three of us, Ken Indelman, Elizabeth Larkin, myself, started traveling all over the place. Every conference, physical therapy conference, exercise conference, URSA, IDEA, every one of them we were traveling to. And our goal was at that time to really bring the science to the industry. It
Yes.
was to validate what we all believed in so much. And so
Amazing. Yeah.
it wasn't until 1992 that we coined the name Polestar, and that actually came from Ken Indelman, who soon after that changed his business from Current Concepts to Balanced Body. So
Okay.
just to put it into perspective of
Yes, the
where
timeline.
it came from. Yeah. And, Peak and all the other, I mean, there's so many schools. I mean, I won't even begin, but I think that all of us have very unique contributions to the industry. And so when
Yes.
people are looking for schools, you should look for, what is that contribution? What's their focus? My good friend Rael Sakowitz,
I was just
um,
going to mention him. Yes.
Rail comes from a physical education background and movement background, and when you look at his curriculum, it has really good
Pedagogy.
structure and pedagogy built into it, as if you were in a exercise science program.
Yes.
If you go to Fletcher with Kyria, Ron Fletcher's program, had a very strong dance background,
Hmm.
and definitely has an essence of that kind of movement, modern dance.
Yes.
If you looked at Power was much more classically based.
Yes.
Scott dominates the fitness industry.
Hmm.
We all have sort of these different twists. In Polestar, we certainly were the first really to come out with the science and the rehabilitation application.
Yes.
So even if you are not a licensed medical practitioner, many, like over half of our graduates are not, are people that find themselves working with people who have, physical and mental and emotional impairments. And so our
Yes.
goal was always, how do we make Pilates available to everybody? Like we became
Yes.
classified as, oh, you're the modifying Pilates. Well, we
Mm.
modified it, make it available to everybody, and then progress them into, something that's more classical or more comprehensive. So
I
that's
haven't
sort
used
of,
the word. Sorry, Brent. I was just thinking. I haven't used the word available very much. We talk about accessible a lot, but I like the word available.
well, that opens up a whole new can of worms, doesn't it?
It does absolutely.
Um, yeah, because we were always coining that idea, that philosophy of ours was to make sure that everybody had access to being able to participate in Pilates,
Right.
which when we expanded about 5 years ago with the PMA, we started saying it shouldn't be every physical or mental limitation having access to Pilates. It should be everybody, basically, sort of a different way of looking at it,
Yes.
of all socioeconomic levels, all races, all
Yes.
men, getting men involved. And you've done a great job of getting Pilates to men. But how do we increase that exposure? How do we change it from being the rich white woman's exercise protocol to one that, right now I'm doing a consulting job for tree trimmers.
Okay.
I mean, these guys are like monkeys climbing up trees. They get hurt. They
Yeah.
have some of the worst injuries you've ever seen in your life. And yet the owner of the company wants them to have a Pilates regimen to be able to provide balance to the demand and the load that they have in their balance of work, rest, and recreation. So
Yes.
again, a lot of times people have thought Joseph Pilates never intended this to be a rich white woman's exercise program.
Right.
He didn't. I mean, he was a boxer.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
he was a scrapper. And so, that was not his intention. But I think we can extrapolate that and say, what you're talking about is how do we expand the opportunity is probably a better word. and this is a conversation I had with Stella from Bozzy, and also now the president of the board.
She's so great. Yeah.
Stella's a great friend. We were having this conversation about, it's not, and you had mentioned it too, it's not about just giving a scholarship. How do we increase awareness and opportunity to even know if somebody wants it? Does that community, can they even think about it? If they're worried about putting food on their table, should we be collectively helping them put food on their table? And then maybe talking about exercise after they get food on the table. I teach a course at the university where we look at wellness and health promotion for physical therapists coming out in the field. And I give them 10 topics. And one of them is dealing with food deserts and underprivileged children that need physical therapy and need services, and how do they reach out in the community? And, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and people aren't getting food, and they're not getting access to medicine and healthcare, and they're not getting access to shelter, hey, come join our free Pilates class. It's like,
so low.
Dude, where are you coming from?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that availability piece. And then the other part to it, when we were saying earlier about how Joseph Pilates wanted to make it holistic, and use that word loosely, like looking at sleep and rest and fresh air, all those different things. Now, as a professional, fitness professional, Pilates instructor, whatever, there's this fine line of speaking beyond my expertise as well, right? And just understanding, when am I speaking outside of my scope? So what is that line when I've gone and got my Pilates cert, but now I recognize that there's sleep deprivation, or there's like food insecurities, all these different things. How do we navigate all that stuff?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is not charted. It's sort of uncharted territory too. Societally, we have not made the effort enough to cross that line. So societally, you could be a pioneer in doing that. One of the things I often encourage all of us to do, and I certainly do it. I mean, I try to set examples of that. But, if we volunteer 2 hours a week into the community somehow, it doesn't have to be in Pilates. It probably should be in something that has to do with health and well-being, which could be something like, like I have a neighbor that has a Robin Hood not-for-profit where she takes our extra eggs from our chickens and food from our garden and different marketplaces, and she takes that, she cooks it up, and she provides hot meals for people who otherwise couldn't provide hot meals for themselves, right? We do a Healthy Life lecture once a month to the community for free that goes over Joe's Essentials. So people come into the cafe in a small town that's 40% Hispanic, 20% Black, 40% white, and we get together and we talk about healthy lifestyles and, bring information and knowledge, education to people. You could go volunteer at a veterans clinic. You could volunteer at an elementary school or wherever it is, teaching 2 free classes a week on Sunday or something like that. It's like we have so much capacity. You think right now there's 27 people on right now counting us. So if we all did 2 hours, that's 50 hours plus a week, which multiply that by 50 weeks, right? Now we're looking at 2,500 free hours of service that went out to the community. And we multiply that by our 100,000 Pilates teachers in the United States, and that number starts ramping up really quick, that 1 or 2 hours a week of us giving forward, paying forward in the community is amazing.
How many of you want to sign up for everything that this guy does now, just because of that? That's honestly, Brent, like that's it. Like, I mean, when you understand, how can I put this? I've said it before. You want to be like global and just having these conversations, but you also want to be local, hyper local, and just touch your community at the same time. And that's a perfect example. I couldn't have said that better. That is so great.
Thank you. And I think this is where, the outreach, the global outreach right now, like I see Lisette from Bolivia that's joining us, a friend of ours. So I know there's, people on, and like you say, people from all around the world, and having Brooke Seiler or these different individuals, that if we can distill one little bit of information that focuses on the local, imagine how powerful of an impact this global message has on the local. And I think that's, and I love it. I mean, I love going to, this is You know, if you're, I know Brooke, your other friend Brooke, that's in Asheville. She's about
Yeah.
3 hours from me. But I'm down sort of in the Raleigh-Durham area, and I'm down south of that in a farming community called Siler City. And
Okay.
our main industry is a chicken plant.
Okay.
And most of the Hispanics work in the chicken plant or in the farms. And they're working two jobs. They're working 16 hours a day. And, you know, they don't just don't have enough money to have computers for their kids to be able to do homeschool while they were doing in the pandemic.
Mhm.
So it's like, I love going down into the town, go to the cafe, find out who's doing what, and just figure it, you know, do a little needs assessment. I mean, talk about
Yeah.
sales approach. Do a needs. Don't come in being the you know the great white hope on the stallion. You know, it's
Right.
like
Yeah.
going in there and just listening and thinking of what does this town need? What does this neighborhood need? And
Yes.
don't make the assumption that you know what it needs because we'll never know.
Right.
But listening to them and realizing, oh, this is something that I could help this town with.
Yes.
This is something.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So much bigger than Pilates. Just reading Lisa's comment here. After my level 2 with Peak, I thought the order was the order, but after your conversation, it was eye-opening to me to understand I could use things from my background to help the client. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. And you know, I think you have to learn the sequence and you have to learn the order. I think
Yeah.
don't, you know, never diminish the value of that sequence. One of the things I did for the first 3 years is I dissected Joseph's orders.
Mm.
And I just from just practical clinical research, like just dissected them down to what is going on in this exercise. Why does he start with 100? Why does he do it this way? What happens if I
Yeah.
change it? And what almost always happens is I come back going like, what a brilliant sequence.
Yes.
Now, if people can't participate in that sequence because of limitations, how do you modify it? For example, I got a course, we're doing critical reasoning course, which is open to
Wow.
all teachers of movement coming up on the farm here in October. And it's all about looking at, you know, the individual and being able to really reason in our heads now. We got this powerful tool called Pilates and Pilates repertoire and Pilates philosophy. How do we look at that individual and be able to
Yes.
identify, you know, how do I best use these tools to help this person participate? Very important word, to
Yes.
participate according to their expectations,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I have two over 90-year-old patients.
Okay.
One of them comes in with a shoulder impingement. She hates her physical therapy. She's screaming that you know, you're killing me in the exercise. So I stop her, like, when does your shoulder bother you? She goes, I told the doctor it only bothers me when I get my coffee cup off the second shelf. And now when I'm here with you in physical therapy. And I said, you know what? Let's make life easy. Put your coffee cup on your first shelf. And she looks at me, she's like, you're an effing genius. And I said, you're discharged, right? Now, the other 90-year-old,
Yes. Yes.
that's all she wanted to participate in. Why would we
Yeah.
make her suffer? She doesn't
Right.
want to, you know, she doesn't want to climb a rope or she doesn't want to, you know, go
Do
swinging off.
shot put. Yeah.
But the other woman wants to be a golfer and is a golfer and has had multiple back surgeries and fracture in the knee and a pacemaker and a pain stimulator and all these things.
Right.
And that's how she perceives herself in her 90s. And
Yes.
so, yeah, she requires a lot of extra attention and she can afford it, but she has, you know, golf coaches, water trainers, physical
Yeah.
therapists, Pilates teachers, you know,
Yep.
and that's what she does because that's what she believes makes her whole in her choice of participation.
Yes.
So those are the kind
Not
of things where I would ask that question is, what do you believe you should be able to do that you're not able to do right now? And that
that's
sets the
that's a
groundwork.
good yeah, that's a great question, Brett. Because I know, like, I was laughing because I would be that person with like a whole entourage behind me at 90, making sure I could still like play flag football and run 100 meter. So like I'm there. But it's funny that you're saying like what their expectations are because being an athlete and being hopeful and being excited about movement, I have to catch myself so many times that I'm imposing someone's
Yeah.
potential on them.
Yeah. And they'll discover it. Martin, it's interesting that a lot of times they might have very low expectations. Like, I just want to walk without pain.
Yes.
And after 2, 3 months of doing Pilates, they're not only walking without pain, like they're tearing it up, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden they start going like, well, if I can walk, why can't I go hiking next time I go to, Colorado?
Right.
I want to go hiking or hiking in my backyard,
Yeah.
or I'd like to maybe think of going skiing again or something. It's like they start expanding their possibilities when we give them little baby steps of function.
Yes.
And the worst thing we can do, and I'm a big advocate of this, is don't leave that person in that modified program.
Right.
Yeah, you gotta keep pulling them up. Got to keep pushing them. It's like, yeah, I found where you can have a successful movement experience. Now what happens if we take a spring away? What happens if we go a little bit lower? What happens if we get rid of the head prop? What happens if we, now have you, articulating without the springs?
Yes. Well, when I was doing my intro, I was talking about our language, our script, and the way that we phrase things. And I just wrote down what happens if. When you present it like that, then they could take ownership of the curiosity of their own potential. And instead of saying, okay, you did that, now take a spring off. Now do this, now do that. Like, we're giving them directives, or we're giving them opportunities to own their movement practice and push the boundary through our words.
Yeah. And one of the challenges we have, and I'll say, it's a challenge for me, and I've been doing it for so many years, so don't feel bad if you find a challenge in this, but it's, how do we find the right amount of load and assistance to create the positive movement experience? And it's really trial and error. Everybody's different. Yeah. That's why, saying that it's always got to be 2 red springs or it's always got to be this, that's not true. When Joseph Pilates was training somebody, if they needed more assistance to hold the 100 position, he put more springs on to hold the legs up. If they're heavier and those legs weigh 200 pounds, you can't use a red and a blue spring for 200-pound legs doing, the 100 on the reformer. Yeah. So, and yet, how do we then start getting to where they can do it without springs and just do the 100 on the mat with their legs extended, right? We might start with their knees bent. We might start with their knees up on a box. So, it's finding that perfect spot, and it's only trial and error.
Yes.
And, everybody's different. And so that's why, I'm so adamant about the idea of don't take away from the beautiful sequencing and the work, but our goal should be, how do we meet that person where they are today? And one of the questions I ask a lot of teachers is, how many people, you could easily say, I got a waiting list of 20 people. That's great. But how many people do you retain?
Right.
So if somebody comes and they have a bad experience because they couldn't do it at this level, and you didn't meet them or you didn't give them a modification, you lost them, and now they don't ever have the opportunity to have the benefits of the Pilates work.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Gold, my friend. Yes, enabling, right? And that's exactly it.
Yeah, create that positive movement experience and then start challenging them.
That phrase, I've heard that phrase used a couple of times. Where does that come from? Is that a Polestar speak?
That's one of my babies. Yeah, I'll take you back. I did my PhD. My dissertation was looking at chronic low back pain.
Okay.
And we looked at the psychosocial factors as well as the physical factors as predictors of outcomes. So what I mean by that is a physical limitation might be something like range of motion or mobility, or it might be strength, or it might be coordination and balance. The psychosocial would be more like self-efficacy or belief or fear measures that influence functional outcome. And functional outcome would be what you're participating in. So if you said, look, I'm a cop, I got to be able to go out on the beat, I got to be able to run, I got to be able to jump a fence. We know what the criteria is. Yes. If you're a firefighter, we know what it is. If you're a baseball player, we know what it is. A basketball player, we know what it is. So when we look at them, we can very easily say, I know you got to jump. I know you got to cut. I know you got to turn quickly. I know you got to be able to climb. You got to use your arms. So we can come up with those functional definitions for that individual. So what we did is we set up the study where we had 90 people, either all of them with chronic low back pain. and particularly chronic low back pain, because I wanted to look at that psychosocial component.
Yes.
And we did all the battery of tests ahead of time. So the functional test, the physical limitations test, and the psychosocial test. And what we found was that in the literature, in the psychology literature, it says that with chronic low back pain, this is a guy named Jeffrey Lackner out of Buffalo, New York. Jeffrey was a behavioral psychologist, and he said that your self-efficacy, what you believe you're able to do,
Yes.
has an 80% correlation with your functional outcome.
80.
Very consistent across the board, 80%. This is a huge number.
Yes.
And if you think of predictive values, this is huge in mathematics and healthcare, right? So 80%. But he also came out with the conclusion that you couldn't influence the self-efficacy. So that's sort of sucks. So that's saying that, Martin, you believe you're going to get better, you're going to get better no matter what. Brent, you don't believe you're going to get better? Sorry, dude, you're out, right? And the difference is they were using behavioral psychology interventions. Now, on the other side, you have the physical therapists that were always measuring the physical limitations and having correlations of 50%.
Okay.
Strength at a 50% correlation with functional outcome. Range of motion, 50% correlation, that's like flipping a coin.
Right, yeah.
Right? But we had change, we just couldn't document it. So we could see the functional change, but we were trying to prove it and predict it from the physical limitations. Right. So what we did is we realized that the positive movement experience is what changed the psychological paradigm in the self-efficacy.
Yes.
It wasn't core strength. Please get rid of that word. It wasn't core strength. It wasn't flexibility, right? Although those were directly benefits of doing the Pilates.
Yes.
They got better, but they didn't predict outcome.
Right.
The
but
successful
hope did.
Is the hope. So the successful movement experience would shift people from the low self-efficacy score to a higher self-efficacy score, which then had an 80% correlation with outcome. So we could easily predict chronic low back pain, which is a huge nightmare for insurance companies. We can predict their outcome. And we also know that it's a sliding scale. If you've been in chronic pain for 20 years, you might need 1 or 2 years of positive movement experiences to change that neurological and psychological sequence or firing that's inside our system. So somebody 3 months could turn around in a week.
Right.
Just having a little bit of hope, they could turn around in a week.
Right. That's a real clinical way of saying shop your instructors. Find somebody that you connect with and cling to them.
Yeah, this is a great point too, Martin, and I think that it's the ultimate goal should be about having those positive movement experiences from every aspect of well-being, right? It doesn't mean that it's easy. Don't confuse a positive movement experience. If they can achieve a hard task without pain, you just hit the lottery.
Absolutely.
That's the goal. And this as a personal trainer and also as a counselor,
Absolutely.
when you hit that, when you hit that difficult movement, that perceived difficulty. I had a client, he was in charge of signs in Sacramento, California, like the street signs.
Okay.
So he'd ride around on his bike, and he would check out which signs need to be changed, and then his crew would come out and change the sign. He was about 5 years away from retirement. One day he's riding his bike, and he's checking out signs, but he's also checking out this really good-looking woman across the street. He hits the fire hydrant with his bike. He catches his perineum on the gooseneck, flips over, lands on his back on the fire hydrant. No. He gets hurt. He tears his skin up. I won't go into too much detail about the scrotum injury, but you can imagine catching it on that. Yeah. And anyway, he gets workers' comp. He gets referred to me for rehabilitation, right? Okay. So he comes in, and he sort of has, if you're familiar with Winnie the Pooh, the Eeyore complex. Eeyore was the donkey, and he's sort of like, I could never do that, or I'll never make it. I'll never be able to go back to work, kind of thing. And one day I had one of our Pilates teachers was in the other room, and Marianne Chicos is hanging upside down doing hanging series on the trapeze table, right?
Yes.
And so, of course, the first thing out of his mouth, I could never do that. And then I'd hear him saying things to like his buddies that were also coming in for physical therapy, things like, man, I'm going to get 6 months paid leave off. Now, City of Sacramento paid its employees full salary, no taxes when they were on disability.
Wow. Yeah.
So what's your incentive to go back to work in a hard job?
Yeah.
It's like, hello. And he's like, I'm going to get a new deck. I'm taking my wife on a cruise with this extra $600 and blah, blah, blah. And I heard it. So when I hear that kind of stuff, it pisses me off a little bit. But we're sitting there and he says, I could never do that. And I'm thinking to myself, next visit, I am taking the harnesses and all the springs and I am strapping you up in the hanging series on that trapeze table. Now, I'd only been out of PT school 2 years. I mean, I was really green. I'd only been teaching Pilates for 3 or 4 years, super green.
Yeah.
And I hang him up on the hanging series. He's hanging upside down. Yeah. And, of course, I got my feet underneath his sacrum, and I'm supporting him. And he's just, like, freaking out the whole time. And then afterwards, we're sitting on the edge of the reformer. We both got these smiles from ear to ear going, like, that's amazing. And they were for completely different reasons, right? Yes. So this patient's going, like, I can't believe I did that. And I'm like, I know it's harder than anything you'd have to do at work. And all of a sudden he's like, oh. You can just see the wheel spin, like, no cruise, no new deck in the back. I got to go back to work kind of thing. And I said, but you know what? Let's take 2 weeks and make sure you're really back on your game. Where he was thinking 6 months and they were playing the workers' comp game, we got him back in about 3 weeks.
But
I learned a huge lesson, right? I learned a huge lesson. It was like, he was also so happy, Martin, that he was doing something that he never before believed that he could do. Could you imagine being a street guy and, probably about 20, 30 pounds overweight and coming in your work clothes and seeing a beautiful dancer doing hanging series, and then 2 days later, you're doing the same now. He doesn't know that I used extra springs and a harness to hold his butt up, and I was underneath him. Didn't matter. The perception, this is a key word, the perception of successfully doing that without pain transitioned his outcome. And that was what made me start asking that question. That's where my, 15 years later, the research came from, is looking at that question. It wasn't like I was caught up in that whole idea of core control and get that transverse abdominis to kick in and isolated training. And after that whole dissertation study is like my completely shifted. And a lot of people think I don't like muscles. Completely the furthest thing from the truth. It's just the respect that I have for the body's nervous system, neuromuscular system, to respond spontaneously, the way a child learns to move. You have children, right?
Yes, yeah, a little older now, but yes.
But you remember, mine are all making children now, but you have the idea of watching them go through this development. We don't tell a child to lift their pelvic floor up or pull their transverse in or their belly to spine when they're learning to move. And it's eloquent. It's amazing at how fast children learn to move based off of motivations and tasks. And we're the same way if we go there. And so I've made a big deal the last 15 years, if anybody's followed what we're teaching and doing, is that, create the optimal alignment that they have in that dynamic alignment movement and trust the load.
Yes.
Trust the load will make the muscles work correctly. If you want them to work more, then you decrease the assistance. If you want them to work less, you increase the assistance or length of lever or whatever the modifications. We are the load masters in the universe.
Yes.
Absolutely. We're the load masters. It's a great topic.
Oh, sorry. And I was going to say too, Brent, do you feel like that's a conversation you have to have at the outset when people come in thinking, okay, well, my bench press is 185. I'm going to make it 205 this week, and then we're going to go 225. That kind of speak that comes from other quantifiable numbers that comes from the other places in the fitness industry, I find I have to catch myself saying to people, okay, so we may have to decrease springs to make this more challenging or increase springs to make it easier, and to kind of shift their mindset so they understand that the load has a different relationship with their body in this space, right?
Yeah,
so,
and there's nothing wrong with the weight load either, right? So it's just, that's where for example, I have somebody now that wants to lift weights. She's 72 years old and she wants to go to the gym and start lifting weights.
Yes.
So it's like, well, let's get your dynamic alignment squared away and your mobility squared away so that your tissues can handle it, and then let's go. Let's go for it. So we were teaching techniques for deadlifting and some of those kind of things with our arms and shoulder alignment. But it's a masterful discussion to convince a client that less sometimes is more, right? Especially if they're coming from that fitness and sport environment. But it doesn't take much. And Shelley Power, my partner in Polestar, will often, instead of telling them what they're going to feel, she's asking them what they feel, right?
Yes.
So what happens if I take this spring off? Oh my gosh, that's so hard. Okay, I'll put it back on. But right there, she just taught the concept of less can be more. Or what happens if you're doing the 100 with your knees bent to start out, and they say, okay, now straighten out the legs to 45 degrees. What happens? Oh my goodness, that's so much weight, right? It's like, yeah, now get on the Pilates reformer.
Yes.
Put your feet in straps with a red and a blue spring. Bring your legs down to 45 degrees. What do you feel? Oh my goodness, that's so much easier. Yeah, it's not strengthening your hamstrings.
Right.
It's assisting your abdominals so you can get a full set of 100 breathing in the right way. And then we can gradually decrease it to a blue spring and then get you back on the mat to do your hundreds that you're going to do at home every day.
Yes. How many of you out there just feel like you want to just go and find your first client right now? My next guy's gonna be, okay, this is what we're doing. All right, we're gonna do it like this. Okay, look at that. I'm gonna just throw my clients. Actually, it's so funny. Like, I have clients who have seen me having these conversations, and they're like, your teaching has changed just from conversations with people. Whereas before, you'd come back from a conference and it'd be like, oh, now let's try this. The conversation is changing the way that I teach.
And I think that's true with all of us, isn't it? I mean, just the massive amount of exposure that we've had. I've been conducting a weekly webinar as well, and mainly looking at the critical reasoning, but we've also brought in some of the social injustice kind of things to discuss in the community and inequalities. We've talked about teaching skills and bring it on the guests. And I tell you, when the guests talk, it's inspiring to me. And I've had Eric Franklin and, just some great leaders in the movement science world coming on. And all of these individuals, different schools, with Rael and with Stella and with, bringing Elizabeth Larkin back on, 20 years later, and looking at the evolution of our work. And I think this is what you're saying, Martin, is that, we need to always be evolving our ability to facilitate movement learning, right? We're the movement specialists. And little tiny things, this is where the mastery comes in. Little tiny things of, what happens if the pelvis is in this position? What do you feel, right? Yes. How do I move from being an external feedback cueing vomiter of information to one little external cue that creates a plethora of internal feedback?
Yes.
And awareness. I mean, that's really the journey.
That is, absolutely.
So the more that they own it, and you think about Joe's comment of, if we practice contrology every day, there's no need for prisons, hospitals, or insane asylums, was really about us practicing the lifestyle independently at home. He wasn't saying people had to come pay money to us to be trained or told what to do in Pilates every day. And I'm making this extrapolation. I didn't talk to Joe. I was 4 years old when he died. But what I understand is, we have his third guiding principle is whole body commitment.
Yes.
It's the discipline and work ethic to be able to practice whole body health. Whole body health he defined as a balanced effort of mind and body with exercise, nutrition, sleep, hygiene, fresh air, sunshine, and a balance of work, rest, and recreation. So if we have to get away from thinking of it as just the exercises. It is the discipline of the individual to practice the healthy contrology lifestyle every day. Every day. Not twice a week. There's an interesting study that Harvard did looking at the top 20 economies and comparing their longevity, how long they live, right? The average person.
Yes.
Guess what? United States was number 20 out of 20. We have the lowest
Shocking.
longevity. So when they started really digging into it, the epidemiologists, to see what was the primary factor that led to Americans having the lowest longevity of the top 20 economies. And I'll give you a little hint. They pulled New York City out.
Yep.
And New York City by itself was number 5.
Wow.
And what they found was suburbia was the leading cause of early death.
Really?
Now, let me make that clear.
Yes.
It really came down to locomotion and transportation.
That's what I was thinking. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So people that live in the city or are used to riding bikes to work or taking the subway and walking was about the daily exercise, the daily need to move
Yes.
at multiple parts of the day. Now, lately, and I'm not promoting it, but I did lose about 30, 40 pounds on it, but Noom. You might have seen Noom out
Yes.
there, the psychology of food. And I was really curious in how they were building their app.
Okay.
And I love it. I mean, it was so amazing to see how our beliefs and those kind of things. But in it, it has a documenter of your activities. Well, yard activity, going out and working on the farm in my yard for 2-3 hours,
Yes.
burns way more calories than a half an hour of intense spinning,
Right.
right? And just being active and walking and getting the 10,000, 15,000 steps a day that you would have in a community transportation in Denmark, in England, in Japan, in Tokyo, you know,
Right.
in any big cities, in Korea. You know, you're walking. You walk to get your groceries. You walk back to your apartment. You take the
Right.
subway. You got at least an hour of walking on both ends of the day sometimes.
Yes.
And so that was the leading factor. And that made me think, if we were truly practicing Joseph Pilates' contrology theory, we would be living that, be disciplined, right? That work
Yes.
ethic we're talking about to have whole body health.
Right.
And that's why you wouldn't see whole body health, meaning mind and body balance. You wouldn't see so much of the corruption. You wouldn't see so much of the disease. You wouldn't see so much of the mental illness that
Right.
we are plagued with right now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So two people are asking where can this study be found, and that question about race culture were included in the study. I'd love to see that.
That was
It
it was a
next time.
Harvard study. I'd have to go look it up, but it's not
Sure.
too old. It's maybe about 10 years old. So if you looked at a Harvard study on epidemiology of longevity in top 20 economies, like on PubMed, it would pop up.
Okay. Cool.
You might have to do a little research, and I'm
Yeah.
sure I have it in one of my archives. So
Yeah.
I can do a little digging.
Sure. So Brent, someone was asking about when your webinars are. How do we access it?
Yeah, they're Thursdays at 3 o'clock
Okay.
Eastern time. They're free. And if you can't make it, you just register for it and you get the video of it. You can look at it later.
Perfect.
But you go to polestarpilates.com/webinars.
Amazing.
And you just sign up for that. Tomorrow, Shelly and I are doing, what do we call it? Analyze the hell out of the squat.
Okay.
So we're going to be looking at, you know, when a basic functional activity, like a lot of clients, like older clients, I just want to be able to squat down and pick up my grandchild, or
Right.
I want to be able to go work in the garden. So we're going to be talking about the squat and how do we always do an interactive kind of thing with, I use something called Mentimeter that allows everybody to participate. We typically have about 800 or so that sign up and about 200 that attend live, just to give you an idea of what we're doing. And again, it's just looking at critical reasoning skills, like how do we look at that? So we've looked at a lot of case studies. We do live case studies where we bring somebody on or we bring a case on and we solve it together, all 200 of us, and we find solutions. And we've also given those to others. Now, funny enough, we did one with Rael Sakowitz, came on live after he tore his Achilles tendon.
Okay. Yeah.
surfing. So we did one for him and another friend of mine. So a lot of times we're able to give back. If people have a certain case they'd like to be
Yes.
represented, they can let me know that too.
That is such a great resource.
Yeah.
Fantastic resource. Man. Yes, just reading some of the comments there. Hi, Shelly. Claire Dunphy Hemmings was in here as well earlier. And Real Yoga Cat asking questions creates awareness, which leads to change. Those were the comments earlier.
Yeah.
Yes, good stuff.
Yeah.
Brett, man, we
Totally
could
agree.
we
Totally
could
agree. If you think of neurolinguistics, when you talk about counseling and just communication, neurolinguistics has been abused in marketing as well, how to
yes,
almost use it in an evil way. But, in a positive way for us to communicate, it is the questioning. It is, rather than putting words in their mouth. For example, my favorite in a young physical therapist is, tell me about your pain. I mean, and then they don't have the patience to wait for the answer. So they're like, is it dull, achy, throbby, pinchy, stabby? And the patient's going like, yeah, it's all of
yeah,
those. It's
right.
all of those. Versus, waiting and saying, so what's preventing you from doing the activities you want to do? What do you believe? Oh, I've got this pain. Yeah. And when you say pain, what do you mean by that? And let them describe it.
Yes,
Don't put words in their mouth. Let them think and articulate, well, it hurts all the time in my leg. So you say it hurts all the time. Is it hurting right now? No. Okay, so we don't want to use the word all the time. Can we think of a better word?
right.
Right? Does it hurt while you're sleeping? No. Okay. All right. So not 6 hours, not while you're here. Let's see if we can identify when you actually feel those symptoms. And I tend to get away from using words like pain or hurt. So
Yes,
I'll talk about symptoms or feelings or awareness of or those kind of things. Educating them, we had one of my favorite examples. I had a client that came in and I asked him what brings him here. And he says, I can't turn my head. And so I said, what do you believe is not allowing you to turn your head? And he says, well, I feel like my head is attached by a string. If I move my head the wrong way, the string will break and my head will fall off. So using my neurolinguistics skills, it was sort of like, so if I understand you correctly, you feel like your head's attached by a string. If you move your head the wrong way, the string will break and your head will fall off. And then I expand it a little bit. And I want to make sure you understood the head falling off and roll around on the floor. And he looks at me like I'm absolutely crazy. I don't say a thing. I'm just looking at him.
right.
And he goes, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? I'm like, no judgment. I want to know what you believe. And I said, let's try this. Why don't you close your eyes? You're a mechanic. You're always looking up inside cars and looking for what's wrong. Close
Yes,
your eyes, go inside with a flashlight, and tell me what you think's going on in your neck. So he closes his eyes, and he's like,
nice.
I see rusty machinery. I'm like, wow, rusty machinery. How would you fix rusty machinery? Right? You see how that
Yes,
shifting of the questioning. Now he's saying, I would lubricate it, break up some of the rust, get the pieces moving again, make sure that they're aligned. I'm like, dude, that's my job as a physical therapist. Will you give me permission to break up some of the rust, move things around, get them lubricated, and get you moving again? Now, what's interesting is, could you imagine if I had tried to manipulate his neck with the belief that his head is attached by a string?
right. The
It
limiting
would not have
beliefs.
been a positive experience.
Right, right.
Yeah. And I think no matter how we look at it, not necessarily from the PT version, but from the Pilates version in this podcast, is asking good questions.
Yes,
We can enhance our language so much. And I think, I often toot Shelley Powers horn, but she is a beautiful communicator in teaching. She has really mastered over the last 30 years, and I'm so impressed with her teaching. But that's a lesson to learn. Like, how do we keep refining our
yes.
language and realizing that we are not the teachers necessarily. We are the facilitator of their learning, right?
Yes.
There's a great book, by the way. Where is it? I've got my library here. It's called Making It Stick.
Oh, yes.
Oh, here it is. Somebody put it in the wrong file, but Make It Stick.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. If you want to be a great teacher and you want to learn better as well, this is a great book. This has helped me a lot. So
Okay.
I think
Make
you got it
it.
right. You can give it to everybody. But
Yes.
this is a great, easy read. It also is on auditory. I know my wife enjoyed it while she was driving to work and back, listening to it and learned a lot from it. But it teaches us how we learn.
Yes.
And, you know, a lot of our traditional cueing and ways of teaching are not the optimal way to facilitate learning.
Right.
And when we
Right.
shift the gears of thinking we're going to facilitate learning, man, we have these amazing experiences and shifts and paradigm shifts that the client experiences, and they progress so much faster and so much happier and so much more confidence. And that's what Joe would talk about, is like he knew his
Absolutely.
work would increase self-esteem and would increase, you know, awareness of the community. Deepak Chopra
Mm.
said when we get to a critical mass of aware people, that there will change the world. And I
Yes.
think that's like 23% is critical mass. So, you know, it's like, just think of, you know, 1 out of 4 people having consciousness and awareness
Yes.
will change the world.
Yes. Wow. I don't know who else was hanging off your every word right now, Brent, but it's good stuff. Really good stuff. That
Well,
Make
thank
It
you.
Stick book, I just took a screenshot of that. I'll repost that so people can find it. And yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it's a great tool. I like it a lot. I mean, I'm always looking for tools, right? I mean, I think, like I said, you know, in the education world, hopefully, we're always looking to improve our skill set, our toolbox,
Right.
and to widen it. Like I teach at a university that is, you know, it's a doctoral program. It's 75% minority that are in the program.
Okay.
And you know, the leadership of the school takes great pride in it. But it's interesting because when you look at again, this is a sort of a sensitive topic, right? But you
Yes.
look at privileged people coming into higher education, and they've been prepped for it their whole life.
Right.
They've gone to these private schools. They've had tutors. They've been told from the beginning of life that, you know, their
This
mom
is
and dad are
expectation.
doctors and attorneys
Yes.
and that they can do anything, and they have all this neurological construct and spiritual construct that they are going to succeed. Doesn't mean they do, and doesn't make them any smarter than anybody else.
Right.
But the advantage is ridiculous, right? Coming into a
Yes.
doctoral program. And usually by this time, if the student is getting into a doctoral program, minority or not, they have overcome a lot of the obstacles of getting
Yes.
through the
Yeah.
education.
Right.
But now we're going into critical reasoning and synthesizing information to become a doctor. It's a very high level of thinking and processing information.
Right.
And so I've been really looking because, you know, what they've been taught up until now is survive. They
Yeah.
socially haven't been taught that their critical reasoning matters.
Right.
I,
Yeah.
and I'm talking about all races. I'm talking about people that have struggled socioeconomically to have the advantage in university studies, right?
Yes.
And I came from that aspect. Like I was the first generation to go to college. Like I didn't know how to read getting into university. I got in because I was a pole vaulter. Um, you know, and the struggling those first couple of years to learn how to comprehend what I was reading.
Yes.
And writing, even worse. Now, like math and analytics, I did really well with. You know, I had a gift for those, but writing and reading and those kind of things, mm-mm. So even my dissertation, I turned my 12 dissertations in before I was accepted. I mean, it's a
Wow.
beast.
Yeah.
So, you know, here's the beast. There's a dissertation. I did 12 copies of this because my writing sucked so bad. You know, like
Yes.
learning how
Those
to
are,
write
yeah,
at the
those are the barriers.
dissertation level. It was really hard. And that's what I'm saying is like, how can we bring learning of movement to a population, and I'm talking about, this is not so much, racial or economically inspired. There are just a lot of people that don't know how to move, right?
Right.
And matter of fact, often the more wealthy they are, the less they know how to move because they haven't had to move. They
Right.
haven't had to work, that kind of thing outdoors. So a lot of times.
Yeah.
But it just depends. Everybody's different in this sense, right? So now we're coming in and we're thinking, how do I create an environment that can allow them to have the greatest ability to learn?
Yes.
And that could be with somebody with a learning disability. It could be with somebody that has autism. It could be with somebody that has a cognitive disorder or an amputation, right?
Yes.
How do we create awareness to be able to, to embrace their body? We had a client the other day that had a total knee replacement and emotionally was completely disconnected from this new joint, like would not accept it. She could visualize her body working everything around it, but couldn't visualize the knee. And it was bringing the awareness into it of realizing that, this is allowing her to be functional now. She wasn't functional before because her knee pain was so bad. How do we, facilitate that now? So sort of fun stuff. But, you're creating the environment. Like one of the things in the book is creating the environment of struggling. Like it's painful to learn.
Yes. Yes.
And quit trying to make things easy because we don't learn when it's too easy. When we spoon feed people and they memorize it, it doesn't have synthesis into our being. We don't incorporate it, right? But when you struggle, like if I ask somebody in the audience right now, could you give me your own definition of neuromuscular education? And they're going to go, right? Especially if I put them on the spot. But what I actually just did is I created a neurological bucket that now when they go look at neuromuscular education, they have a place to put infinite amount of information that they can now synthesize other things. It's the same thing with learning our apparatus. We do better. I'm going to give you a big secret, all right? This is a proprietary secret.
Okay.
But when you teach Pilates one apparatus at a time, you're doing a huge disservice.
Yep.
I don't know if I should say more than that because I'll give away why Polestar does so well in its education program. But others are following. When you layer all of the apparatus and the mat work at the same time, it's hard as hell.
Yes.
It is really hard to learn, but that's the better way of learning.
Yes.
You will have that synthesized information. You will have that growth that all of a sudden you have like this explosion of, oh my gosh, mermaid across all the different apparati. Wow, wow, wow. Now I understand which one's more challenging, which one's less challenging. Oh, you mean that feet and straps is like the 100? Oh my gosh, rollover is the same thing as short spine and long spine. Whoa, kind of, having that integration and forcing that discussion. This is where the depth of learning, modification, and manipulating our environment explodes. It explodes. If you learn it only as, here's my reformer exercises, now I'm going to do my trapeze exercises, now I'm going to do my barrel exercises, now I'm going to do my one-to-chair exercises, you miss out on that struggle of integrating the apparatus. You'll do it later on. You'll do it later on, even and you don't even know it, but you get forced to, especially if you're working in a studio where there's multiple people. It's like, well, the reformer is not available, and this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah, so let's just figure it out over here.
You gotta go figure it out. Like, how can I create that with a tower bar or with a one-to-chair or standing?
Yes.
Yeah.
I so appreciate your passion for learning, just the depth you put into this. Like, it's one thing to love the exercise and movement and helping people. It's another thing to have this depth of just understanding how. I love that how. And
the why.
And the why.
And the why.
Yeah. So challenged by that. So inspired by that. Thank you, Brent.
You're very welcome. I appreciate all you're doing out there. And I'll be following you more regularly, too, now that I've gone back and did my little Martin Reed research. And you're doing some good work out there. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Good leadership.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Thank you to everyone who has been here in the chat. Your pregnancy plies impact is like more please. So definitely jump on his webinars and just keep, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely game changing. Great words of wisdom. Yes, look out for that book, Make It Stick as well. Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone who joined the chat. Brent, this has been so rich in so many ways. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, everybody who joined. God bless you.
All right.
Be kind. Be kind. Above all, be kind.
Yes. No doubt.
All
All
right.
right. Signing off. Thank you.
Thank you again.